Hey guys, tonight we're going to walk into a world where a misplaced word, a suspicious birthmark, or even just being a little too pretty could land you on a pyre. Imagine stepping out of your thatch-roofed cottage, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. You pull your rough wool cloak tighter, your breath misting in the cold, and you know, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that every single person you pass is judging you. Their eyes follow you, not with curiosity, but with a cold, calculating fear. A sudden sickness in a child, a spoiled batch of ale, a cow that goes lame, any of it could be your fault, and if you're unlucky, someone is already whispering your name. In this world, you probably won't survive. Your life, your reputation, your very existence, hangs by the thinnest of threads, spun from superstition and malice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the muddy track, the hem of your simple woolen gown dragging in the muck, and you can feel the eyes on you. You're a young woman, not yet 20, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as green as new leaves. It's a beautiful day, sunlight glinting off the puddles and warming your face. But it feels like the whole village is watching you, judging you. This is the first, and perhaps most unfair, of the reasons you might be called a witch in the Middle Ages. You're simply too pretty. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? As if God would punish you for being blessed with good looks. But in a society where piety was intertwined with a kind of plain, humble aesthetic, standing out for your beauty was a dangerous thing. People were suspicious of anything that deviated from the norm. Your flawless skin, your bright eyes, your easy laugh, they weren't seen as natural blessings. They were proof of a pact with something sinister, a deal with the devil himself. Mainstream historical fact here. The fear of female sexuality played a massive role in the witch hunts. Beautiful women were seen as more tempting, more likely to lead men astray, and thus, more susceptible to the devil's wiles. A woman's beauty was a powerful, and therefore, dangerous, weapon. This deep-seated fear was often rooted in the story of Eve and the forbidden fruit, casting women as perpetual temptresses. But it wasn't just men you had to worry about. The jealousy of other women, your contemporaries, could be just as deadly. You walk past the miller's wife, a sour-faced woman with a web of wrinkles and tired eyes, and she barely gives you a glance. Yet, you know that her heart is full of resentment. She sees your youth, your vibrancy, and a voice in her head, fueled by rumor and superstition, whispers, "Why her? Why is she so lucky?" Perhaps her husband looked at you a little too long last Sunday. Perhaps her own daughter is homely and plain. Whatever the reason, your beauty has become her private torment, and her silent resentment is a poison that could turn into an accusation at any moment. Historians still argue whether the accusations were driven more by genuine religious fear or by social and personal grudges. It was a potent cocktail of both. Really, the fringe tidbit that highlights this is that in some communities, an accused witch's physical attractiveness was used as a form of proof in the trials. The logic was that a truly holy and pious woman would be outwardly plain, her inner spiritual beauty being her only concern. Any overt physical beauty was a sign of vanity, which was a gateway sin. So, your beautiful face and healthy glow are not seen as a sign of a good life, but rather as an unholy mask. You've somehow tricked nature, perhaps with a potion, a spell, or worse, with the devil's help. It's a lose-lose situation, isn't it? You can't exactly hide your face, and a sudden, self-imposed ugliness would probably be even more suspicious. You're a walking contradiction, a beautiful woman in a world that believes beauty can only be a lie. It's a cruel irony that the very thing that makes you appealing to some, makes you an abomination to others. You just want to get to the market, buy a few eggs and some flour, and get back home, but you can feel the weight of this invisible target on your back. You're a witch in the making, simply for having the audacity to be born with a pretty face. You hurry your pace, the soft murmur of the crowd now feeling like a rising tide of suspicion. As you navigate the winding, cobbled lanes, you pass the town apothecary. His name is Master Alaric, a stooped, gray-bearded man with kind, but intensely focused, eyes. He's known to spend his days poring over dusty tomes and vials filled with strange liquids. He's also the second reason you might be labeled a witch in this age. You're too smart. Knowledge, especially knowledge that isn't from the scriptures, is a dangerous thing. It's a double-edged sword. A tool that could be used for good, but is often seen as a weapon of the devil. You might, like Master Alaric, have a keen mind, a thirst for understanding how the natural world works. You might know which herbs soothe a fever and which can stop bleeding. Maybe you can read and write, a skill that sets you apart from 99% of the population. In an age where most people live in a world of simple faith and superstition, anyone who seeks a deeper, more logical understanding of things is viewed with a heavy dose of fear. The mainstream historical fact here is that literacy rates were extremely low during the Middle Ages, especially among women. For a woman to be able to read, and worse, to own books, was an immediate red flag. A book could be a grimoire, a spell book, a manual for dark arts. The ability to decipher ancient symbols and texts was seen as a way of communing with forces beyond the natural world, rather than a skill to be celebrated. So, imagine you, with your pretty face, sitting by the firelight, carefully mending a tear in your husband's tunic while quietly reciting lines of Virgil from a stolen scrap of parchment you found. That is a recipe for disaster. The soft glow of the fire would be seen as the glint of hellfire in your eyes, and the murmur of Latin would be the sound of a dark incantation. You're not just a curious woman, you're a practitioner of forbidden knowledge. Historians still argue whether the Church's suppression of knowledge was a primary cause of the witch hunts or simply a convenient tool used to control the populace. It was likely a combination, but the outcome was the same: ignorance was safe, and knowledge was deadly. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the story of people being accused simply for knowing how to count or for having a rudimentary understanding of mathematics. Someone who could quickly tally up the costs of a trade deal or calculate the phases of the moon was often thought to be using some form of infernal arithmetic. A pact with a demon who granted them unnatural mental acuity. They couldn't possibly be that smart on their own, could they? Their intelligence was seen as a gift, but a gift from the wrong source. You recall a story you heard just last month about a woman in a neighboring village who was accused because she knew the proper time to plant seeds to get the best harvest. It wasn't simple folk wisdom in the eyes of her accusers, it was a pact with the earth demons. This is a world that doesn't celebrate ingenuity, it fears it. It doesn't see your intelligence as a sign of a sharp mind, but as proof of a deal with the devil. That quick-witted answer you gave to the tax collector? The way you effortlessly calculated the cost of that bolt of linen? They aren't signs of a clever mind. They're signs of a woman whose soul has already been bartered for earthly power. That's why you try to keep your head down, to speak as little as possible, to pretend you can't read the signs above the marketplace stalls, but you can feel the thoughts of the people around you. A silent chant of suspicion. She's too quick, they think. She's too clever by half. And in this world, that is more than enough to condemn you. The memory of Master Alaric, alone and feared in his shop of wonders, is a chilling reminder of what happens when your mind shines a little too brightly. As you leave the town center, a slight chill runs down your spine, and you find yourself in a quieter part of the village, a cluster of small, isolated cottages. You pass a woman named Elspeth, a solitary figure in her late 40s, who is sweeping her doorstep with a broom made of birch twigs. She doesn't look up at you, her face grim and set, but you can feel her presence like a stone in your path. This brings us to the third reason you might be called a witch: you're not married. In a society built on the family unit and the patriarchal order, a woman who existed outside of that structure was an anomaly, and therefore, a threat. A woman without a husband had no man to govern her, no master to guide her actions, and no social contract to bind her to the community's expectations. She was, in essence, her own master, and in the Middle Ages, that was a truly terrifying prospect for many. The mainstream historical fact that underscores this is the concept of a woman's place in society being strictly defined by her relationship to a man, as a daughter, a wife, or a widow. An unmarried woman who was neither a young girl nor a cloistered nun was a social and economic outlier. She was often seen as sexually dangerous, an uncontrolled force of temptation and desire. The thinking was that if she wasn't married, It must be because she was either too wicked to be a wife or had already given her affections to a darker, more powerful suitor, the devil himself. You can almost hear the whispers that follow Elspeth. The same whispers that might soon follow you. She's been alone for too long. What sort of man would have her now? She must have made a pact. The absence of a husband wasn't seen as a choice, but as a stain, a clear sign of her unsuitability for a godly life. Historians still argue about the true extent to which the witch hunts were a tool for enforcing social conformity. But it's clear that women who defied traditional roles were particularly vulnerable. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is that in some communities, an unmarried woman who inherited land or a business from her family was viewed with immense suspicion. The reasoning went that a woman alone couldn't possibly be a good steward of her inheritance without some kind of sinister help. Her success was seen as an unholy prosperity, a sign that she was receiving assistance from a malevolent source rather than simply being a clever businesswoman. You can imagine a woman, having worked her fingers to the bone to run her family's tannery after her father passed, only to be accused of witchcraft because the business was inexplicably successful. The more her fortunes grew, the more suspicion she attracted. Her prosperity wasn't a testament to her hard work, it was a sign of her unnatural pact. It's a bizarre reality, isn't it? You're walking a tightrope. You're too pretty. You're too smart. And now, if you're not married, you're too independent for your own good. The very idea of a self-sufficient woman in this era was often conflated with a rejection of God's plan. You're supposed to be a wife, a mother, and a dutiful member of a family. To be anything else is to be a dangerous, unanchored vessel, drifting aimlessly until you're snagged by the devil's net. Elspeth continues to sweep her doorstep, her back to you, her solitude a silent accusation against herself. You hurry past her cottage, a wave of sadness washing over you. You realize that your own path, should you choose to remain unmarried, is a lonely and perilous one. Your independence is a ticking clock, counting down to the moment someone decides to cast a suspicious eye your way and connect all the seemingly disparate threads of your life into one neat, damning narrative. A narrative that ends with you, not on a path to a happy future, but on trial for your very soul. You've made it past Elspeth's cottage and are now heading down a wider lane that leads toward the more prosperous part of the village. The houses here are larger, their timber frames more neatly painted, their windows filled with clear glass instead of greased parchment. As you pass the home of Master Thorne, the wealthy merchant, you can't help but notice the meticulously kept gardens and the sturdy stone fence. His wealth is a testament to his success, but it's also a powerful, and in some cases, a very dangerous thing. This brings us to the fourth reason you might be called a witch: you're rich. It's a cruel twist, isn't it? In a world where poverty is the norm, having an abundance of worldly goods is not always seen as a blessing from God, but rather as a sign of a demonic pact. The mainstream historical fact is that accusations of witchcraft were often a convenient way to seize a person's assets. When someone was found guilty, their property, their land, their livestock, their home, was typically forfeited to the local lord or the accuser. So, if you were a wealthy widow or a successful merchant who had no obvious male heir, your riches made you a prime target. Your neighbors, your rivals, even the local authorities might cast a greedy eye your way. Your fine silk dress, your silver-handled comb, the solid gold coin you keep tucked in your purse, these aren't just symbols of your hard work. They are a tangible motive for someone to whisper a lie about you to the local bailiff. It's a sad reality that your prosperity could be the very thing that seals your fate. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were more about land and wealth or about genuine religious fervor. But it's clear that money was a powerful accelerant. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the concept of unnatural gain. If a farmer's crops grew faster or were more bountiful than his neighbors, or if a weaver's loom produced more fabric than anyone else's in the village, it was sometimes attributed to dark magic. The assumption was that normal, honest labor couldn't possibly yield such a spectacular return. A person's success was seen as a zero-sum game. For you to have so much, you must have taken it from someone else, perhaps by magically blighting their fields or spoiling their goods. The success of the wealthy merchant, Master Thorne, is a marvel to the villagers, but it's also a source of deep suspicion. They see his success and whisper, "How did he get so rich? So quickly? No man can be that blessed by God. The answer, in their minds, is simple and sinister. He sold his soul. You continue walking, trying not to stare at the opulence of Master Thorne's home. But a part of you is already picturing the scene. The accusation would start with something small. A whispered rumor about a strange symbol on his door or a book he keeps hidden. Then, it would grow. A rival merchant's ship is lost at sea. A neighbor's cow stops giving milk. A sudden fire ravages a row of homes. Each misfortune is a new brick in the wall of his accusation. And his wealth, his fine home, his beautiful things, becomes the mortar that holds it all together. It's a tragic inversion of logic. Your prosperity is not a sign of your virtue, but of your vice. The very things you've worked hard to earn become the instruments of your downfall. You clutch the small leather purse at your waist, feeling the few coppers within it, and for the first time, you are grateful that you have so little to lose. You're now approaching the edge of the village, the last few cottages giving way to the open fields and a dense, whispering wood. A woman hurries past you, a bundle of fresh linens clutched to her chest. It's Agnes, the village midwife, and her face is a mask of weary determination. Her presence brings us to the fifth reason you might be accused of witchcraft. You're a midwife. In a world where birth and death are a common, daily reality, the midwife holds a unique and powerful position. She is present at the most intimate moments of a family's life, a witness to both profound joy and unimaginable sorrow. This closeness to the cycles of life and the mysteries of the human body made her both indispensable and deeply suspicious. The mainstream historical fact here is that midwives were often the sole medical practitioners for a large part of the population. Especially in rural areas, their knowledge of herbs, childbirth, and a woman's body was a form of power that was often viewed with suspicion by the male-dominated medical and religious establishments. A difficult birth, a stillborn child, or a sudden fever that claimed the life of a new mother could all be attributed to the midwife's alleged foul play. She could have put a curse on the child, or perhaps she made a deal with the devil to steal the baby's soul. Her knowledge, a blend of traditional wisdom and a lifetime of hands-on experience, was a thin line away from being labeled sorcery. A woman who knows how to make a tea that eases the pain of childbirth is a healer. A woman who knows how to make a potion that prevents pregnancy is a witch. The line was that fine, and it was often drawn by the accuser. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a deliberate campaign to eliminate competition for male doctors. But it's clear that midwives were disproportionately targeted. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that midwives could magically transfer illness or misfortune from one person to another. If a woman had a difficult pregnancy and the midwife helped her through it, some people might believe that the midwife had somehow caught the curse and could pass it on to the next person she helped. A midwife's hands, which were meant to be healing, were seen as conduits for evil. You can almost see the weight of this knowledge on Agnes's face. The deep lines around her eyes telling a story of countless births, but also countless whispered accusations. She's not just delivering babies, she's navigating a treacherous social landscape where her every action is scrutinized. You watch Agnes disappear down the lane, the soft white of her linens a stark contrast to the drab gray of the day. You realize that her life, and by extension, your life, is a series of catch-22s. If she succeeds, she's a miracle worker, but her success is so unusual that it must be unnatural. If she fails, she's a witch, and her failure is proof of her malice. She is a woman on the front lines of life and death, armed with nothing but her knowledge and her experience, and the world is ready to turn on her at a moment's notice. It's a terrifying position to be in. You, with your quick mind and independent spirit, are already halfway there. You have a knowledge of the natural world, a way of looking at things that isn't steeped in blind faith. It's a knowledge that you keep hidden, but every time you identify a healing herb or know a bit of folk wisdom, you feel a jolt of fear. You are a potential midwife in spirit, and that is more than enough to be called a witch. The path widens into a dirt road, and you feel the soft crunch of pebbles under your worn leather shoes. You notice a man named Thomas, a tanner, tending to a rack of hides outside his workshop. He has a pockmarked face and a nasty, crooked scar that runs from his temple down to his chin, a memento from a fight years ago. He is a perfectly fine man, but in this age, that scar could be a mark of something far more sinister. This brings us to the sixth reason you might be called a witch: you have scars. In a world that believed the body was a reflection of the soul, any kind of physical deformity, birthmark, or unusual scar could be interpreted as a sign of a pact with the devil. It was a literal branding, a physical record of a spiritual debt. The mainstream historical fact here is the concept of the witch's mark, or devil's mark. These were believed to be places on the body where the devil had touched his servant, leaving an insensitive spot that would not bleed or feel pain when pricked. It could be a mole, a wart, a birthmark, or, as in Thomas's case, a prominent scar. In a witch trial, the accused would be stripped naked and their entire body would be meticulously examined for any such marks. A sharp pin, often a specially made, retractable one, would be used to probe these spots. If the accused didn't bleed or react to the pain, it was considered undeniable proof of their guilt. Imagine the cruelty of it all. An old battle wound, a childhood burn, or a simple freckle could be the very thing that condemns you to death. Historians still argue whether the witch's mark was a genuine belief or a convenient fiction used by witch hunters to secure a conviction. It was probably a mix, but the effect was the same. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is that the lack of any visible mark could also be a problem. If an accused person had a perfectly unblemished body, some interrogators would assume the witch had a powerful demon helping them conceal their mark. It was a no-win scenario. You could have a mark and be a witch, or have no mark and be an even more powerful, and therefore more dangerous, witch. The world was so determined to find evidence of evil that it would invent a reason for guilt even in the absence of any. Thomas, with his jagged scar, is a perfect example of this tragic logic. He's a good man, a hard worker, but that scar is a constant reminder of the physical flaws that could so easily be misinterpreted. You watch as he dips a fresh hide into a vat, his scarred face twisted in concentration. You think back to the small birthmark on your shoulder, a faint brown splash of color that looks like a smudge of mud. You have never given it a second thought, but now, the memory of it makes you shiver. You've already been judged for your beauty, your mind, and your social status. Now you realize that even your body, every inch of your skin, is a potential piece of evidence against you. The world isn't looking for proof of your innocence, it's looking for confirmation of its own fears. And in the face of a physical imperfection, a simple scar, those fears become undeniable certainties. You walk past the tanner's shop and find yourself in the central square, a bustling hub of commerce and gossip. A small crowd has gathered around the town crier, who is reading out a new decree from the local lord. As he finishes, you hear a woman in the crowd, a market seller with a basket of apples, grumble loudly about the new tax. "It's a disgrace," she exclaims, her voice ringing out for all to hear. Her neighbors shush her, their eyes wide with fear, and she shrinks back, her outburst a quickly forgotten moment of dissent. But in your mind, you know what she has just done. She has committed the seventh reason you might be called a witch. You spoke out. In a hierarchical society where authority was meant to be unquestioned, any form of public dissent, especially from a woman, was seen as a challenge to the established order. It wasn't just a political act, it was a spiritual one. To question a lord was to question God, who had placed that lord in power. The mainstream historical fact here is that social control was a key function of the witch hunts. By targeting those who spoke out, the authorities could silence dissent and reinforce their power. A woman who dared to voice an opinion on politics, religion, or even local affairs was seen as stepping outside of her prescribed role. She was meant to be quiet, submissive, and obedient. Any deviation from this was seen as a sign of a rebellious spirit, a spirit that was often assumed to be influenced by the devil. The market seller's grumble wasn't just a complaint about taxes, it was a sign of a corrupt and ungodly spirit. Her neighbor's fear was not just of the Lord's wrath, but of the spiritual contamination she might spread. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a deliberate tool of social engineering or a spontaneous phenomenon born of fear. But it's clear that a woman's public voice was a dangerous thing. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is that in some communities, an accusation of witchcraft could be used to shut down legal challenges to a man's authority. If a woman tried to sue a male neighbor or contest a land deed, Her male opponent might simply accuse her of witchcraft, often ending the legal dispute and sealing her fate. Her attempt to speak out, to use the legal system to her advantage, became the very thing that condemned her. You can imagine the chilling effect this would have on society. You'd learn to keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your opinions to yourself. The market seller, with her brief moment of rebellion, is a brave fool. She doesn't realize the price she could pay for her words. You turn away from the square, the sounds of the crowd fading behind you, and you think about the things you've been told to keep quiet about. The injustice you've seen, the whispers you've heard, the thoughts you've had, all of it is a potential charge against you. Your voice, your thoughts, your very spirit of defiance, are all potential evidence. You realize that a woman's silence in this world is not a sign of virtue, but a sign of survival. You must learn to be invisible, to blend in, to not make a single ripple in the calm, controlled surface of this society. Because the moment you do, the moment you speak out, you are no longer a woman with an opinion, you are a witch. You leave the marketplace behind, the sounds of commerce and the memory of the market seller's outburst still echoing in your ears. The path now leads you past a series of muddy, fallow fields. The soil here is poor, and the harvest this year has been a disaster, leaving the villagers on edge and hungry. You see a farmer, a man named Bartholomew, standing forlornly in the middle of his ruined crops, his head bowed in despair. He is a good, hard-working man, but his misfortune is a dangerous thing in this time. This brings us to the 8th reason you might be called a witch: your crops failed. In a world that relied entirely on the whims of nature for survival, a bad harvest wasn't just bad luck, it was often seen as the result of a deliberate, malicious act. Someone, somewhere, must have been responsible for this. And if you happened to be a woman who was already on the fringes of society, you would be the perfect scapegoat. The mainstream historical fact here is the deep-seated belief in sympathetic magic. The idea was that a witch could use an effigy or a spell to cause a parallel disaster in the real world. A tiny, symbolic fire could burn down a real barn. A doll stuck with pins could make a real person sick. In the same way, a witch could curse a field, causing the seeds to rot in the ground, the rain to fail, or the pests to multiply. The farmer, Bartholomew, doesn't see a natural blight. He sees a supernatural curse. His despair is not just a personal sadness, it's a form of spiritual rage. A desperate need to find a target for his blame. The community's hunger becomes a collective motivation to find the person responsible. And in a time of mass hysteria and fear, reason is the first casualty. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a direct response to climate change or periods of famine. But the correlation is undeniable. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is that in some cases, the accusation of crop blighting was a way for a community to enforce agricultural conformity. A farmer who tried a new method of planting, a different crop, or a new type of fertilizer might be accused of witchcraft if his new method failed, or even if it succeeded too well and made his neighbors jealous. The safest thing to do was to do exactly what your ancestors had done, year after year. And any deviation was a sign of a dangerous, and possibly demonic, innovation. The farmer Bartholomew, with his ruined fields, is a victim not just of the weather, but of the social and spiritual expectations of his community. His failure is a wound in the collective body of the village. And that wound demands a sacrifice. You walk past his field, your heart heavy with a mixture of pity and fear. You're not a farmer, but you know that in this world, everyone is interconnected. His misfortune is a threat to the entire village, and a threat to the entire village is a threat to you. The hunger in their bellies will turn into a fire in their hearts, and that fire will need something to burn. You realize that your past actions, the time you mentioned to your neighbor that her soil was too acidic, or the time you picked a few wild herbs from the edge of the woods, could be twisted into a sinister narrative. You weren't offering advice, you were putting a curse on the soil. You weren't gathering herbs, you were communing with nature spirits. The world around you is no longer a world of simple cause and effect. It is a world of magic and malice, and your every action could be reinterpreted as proof of your guilt. You're still walking along the path, but now you've reached the pasture where the village's livestock grazes. You see a man, old man Silas, kneeling beside his prize cow, Bessie. Her head is drooping, her eyes are glazed over, And she has a terrible, rattling cough. Silas's face is a mask of grief and impotent fury. And as you get closer, you hear him muttering to himself. A curse, he whispers, his voice thick with a mixture of sorrow and rage. It's a curse. This brings us to the 9th reason you might be called a witch. Your neighbor's cow died. In a world where livestock represented a family's wealth, health, and a significant portion of their diet, the death of a single animal was a minor catastrophe. It wasn't seen as a natural occurrence, a random stroke of misfortune, but as a deliberate act of malice. Someone, somewhere, must be responsible. The mainstream historical fact here is that accusations of animal blighting, or causing livestock to sicken and die, were extremely common in witch trials. The logic was that a witch, in their desire to harm a neighbor, would not just attack the person directly, but would target their most valuable possessions. A cow was often the most valuable possession a family owned, providing milk, cheese, and a source of labor for the fields. The death of a cow was a devastating blow, and the grief-stricken owner would be desperate to find a cause. You, with your reputation for being a bit of an oddity, your quick mind and independent spirit, are a perfect, ready-made explanation. Silas isn't just mourning his cow, he's looking for a human face to put on his tragedy. And yours is a convenient choice. Historians still argue whether the accusations were a genuine belief in witchcraft or a form of social warfare. But the effect was the same. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that witches could use a special kind of magic to steal the milk from a cow. The witch would allegedly milk an object, like a broom handle or a towel, while chanting a spell, and the milk would be magically siphoned from the neighbor's cow, leaving it dry. This belief was so widespread that some communities would hold special rituals to try to catch the witch in the act, or to reverse the spell. You can see the tragic absurdity of it all. Old man Silas's cow probably just caught a fever, a common illness in livestock. But the simple, logical explanation is the least satisfying one. The human mind, especially in a time of great fear and loss, prefers a villain to a virus. You hurry past Silas and his dying cow, your heart pounding in your chest. You're not a monster, you're not a witch. You're just a woman trying to make it through the day. But you know that in the eyes of old man Silas, you are a walking, breathing motive for his loss. He remembers the time you told him his fence was weak, or the time you refused to sell him a bit of extra cheese because you didn't have enough. He remembers your pretty face, your independent nature, your quiet intelligence. All of these things, which once seemed so benign, now form a damning picture. You weren't just a neighbor, you were a threat. And now, his prize cow is dying. And you are the reason why. The world around you is no longer a place of reason and consequence, it's a place of magic and malice. And you're caught right in the middle of it. The path turns back towards the village, and you find yourself in front of a small cottage. Its thatch roof sagging and its walls in need of repair. A solitary figure sits on a rough-hewn bench outside, her hands gnarled and her face a roadmap of a hard life. It's Margaret, a woman who lost her husband to the plague 5 years ago. Since then, she has lived alone, a silent, almost spectral presence in the community. Her tragic situation brings us to the 10th reason you might be called a witch. You're a widow. In a society where a woman's identity was so wrapped up in her husband, a widow was a figure of both pity and immense suspicion. She was a woman without a man to guide her, and therefore, without a moral compass. She was also a woman with property. And that, as we've already discussed, was a dangerous combination. The mainstream historical fact here is that widows, especially childless ones, were particularly vulnerable to accusations. With their husbands gone, they lost their primary protector and advocate. They no longer had a man to speak for them in a dispute, to represent them in legal matters, or to physically defend them from harm. This lack of protection made them easy targets. Their grief was often misinterpreted as a sign of malice, their solitude as a sign of a dark inner life. A woman who grieved too little was seen as heartless. A woman who grieved too much was seen as possessed by a melancholic, demonic spirit. There was no right way to be a widow. Margaret, with her silent, lonely grief, is a perfect example of this. Her sadness is a private burden, but it is also, in the eyes of her neighbors, a public display of her ungodly character. Historians still argue about the extent to which the witch hunts were a way of dispossessing women of their property. But it's clear that widows' estates were often a target. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that a widow who did not remarry was often thought to be keeping her deceased husband's spirit in servitude. The idea was that she was so powerful, so much a master of her own destiny, that she could even control the dead. This made her not just a solitary figure, but a dangerous one. Margaret, who has lived alone for 5 years, is not just a grieving widow, she is, in the minds of the superstitious, a woman who has a ghost at her beck and call. The fact that her small plot of land is still productive, that her hens still lay eggs, is not seen as a testament to her hard work, but as proof of her unholy pact. You watch Margaret, a small, stooped figure in the twilight, and you feel a profound sadness. Her life is a living paradox. She is a figure of pity, but also a figure of fear. She is a woman who has lost everything, but her small bit of independence is seen as a sign of her power. You think back to your own life, your own independence, and you feel the weight of this knowledge. You are a woman alone, not yet a widow, but you can see the path laid out before you. It is a path of suspicion, of scrutiny, of potential violence. You realize that in this world, a woman's strength, her resilience, her very ability to survive on her own, is not a sign of her character, but a sign of her connection to the devil. And for Margaret, the widow, that connection is a living, breathing reality. You turn from Margaret's cottage and walk along a narrow, unpaved lane that snakes behind the other houses. Here, the homes are smaller still, little more than hovels cobbled together from mud and straw. You pass a woman with a child on her hip, her face gaunt and her clothes little more than rags. She holds out a hand as you pass, her eyes pleading. This is Agnes, and she and her child are beggars. Her plight brings us to the 11th reason you might be called a witch. You're a beggar. In a time of great poverty, a person with nothing was a figure of both pity and immense fear. A beggar was a reminder of how close everyone was to the edge. A walking, breathing symbol of misfortune, and in a world that craved order and reason, misfortune had to have a cause. A person with nothing must have done something to deserve it, and that something was often a pact with the devil. The mainstream historical fact here is that social outcasts were often the easiest targets for accusations. They had no one to speak for them, no one to vouch for their character, and no one to defend them in a trial. A beggar, who was already on the margins of society, was a convenient scapegoat for a community's problems. If a child fell ill, if a fire broke out, if a cow went lame, it was easy to blame the person who already represented everything that was wrong with the world. Agnes, with her pleading eyes and her hungry child, is a perfect example of this. Her poverty is not seen as a sign of her bad luck, but as a sign of her bad character. She must have sold her soul for something, and her current state is her just reward. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a form of social cleansing, a way of getting rid of the undesirables in a community. But it's clear that beggars were disproportionately accused. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that witches, in their desire for power, would often trade their worldly goods for demonic favor. A person with nothing, a beggar, was seen as a prime candidate for such a pact. They had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. The fact that Agnes has nothing is not seen as a reason for her to be pitied, but a reason for her to be feared. She has traded her soul for something, and that something is not a full belly or a warm bed, but a malevolent power that she can use to harm others. Her hunger is not just a physical reality, it's a spiritual one. You drop a small copper coin into Agnes's outstretched hand, and she nods her thanks, her eyes still full of a terrible emptiness. You walk on, your heart heavy with the injustice of it all. You are a woman with a home, a bit of food in your larder, and a few good clothes. But you know that the line between you and Agnes is a thin one. A line that could be erased by a single bad harvest or a single malicious accusation. You realize that in this world, a woman's misfortune is not a reason for empathy, but a reason for suspicion. And for a woman with nothing, her very existence is a crime. You move along the road, away from the hovels, and come to a place where the forest starts to press in on the village. A strange, old man is sitting on a fallen log, whittling a small piece of wood. He has a long, unkempt beard and wears a collection of odd trinkets around his neck, a raven's feather, A polished stone. A piece of a deer's antler. His behavior is unusual. His appearance unconventional. This brings us to the 12th reason you might be called a witch. You just look weird. In a society that prized conformity and order, any deviation from the norm was a cause for suspicion. To look different, to dress in a peculiar way, or to simply have strange habits was to mark yourself as an outsider. A person who had rejected God's natural order. This old man, with his odd appearance and solitary nature, is a perfect target for the village's fears. The mainstream historical fact here is that social conformity was a powerful tool of control. By enforcing a strict dress code and social behavior, the authorities could easily identify and isolate anyone who didn't fit in. A person who wore clothes that were too bright, too old, or simply out of the fashion of the time was seen as a person who had no respect for the established order. A person who spoke to themselves, who collected strange trinkets, or who had a peculiar way of walking was not seen as an eccentric, but as a person whose mind and body were under the control of a sinister force. This old man, who you know is simply a harmless hermit, is, in the eyes of the village, a walking, breathing anachronism, a sign of a dark inner life. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a tool to punish eccentricity or simply a byproduct of a superstitious and fearful society. But the effect was the same. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that witches and their familiars could shapeshift into animals. A person who had a strange, animalistic gait or who was known for spending a lot of time alone in the woods was often thought to be a witch in disguise. This old man, with his raven's feather and his solitary nature, is not just a quirky hermit, he is, in the minds of the superstitious, a man who communes with dark spirits and who might, at any moment, transform into a crow and fly away. His appearance and his behavior are not just eccentricities, they are proof of his guilt. You walk past him, giving him a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a deep and profound pity. You know that he is a good man, a man who has chosen to live a simple, solitary life, but in this world, that is not a choice, it is a crime. You realize that your own small peculiarities, the way you hum a tune to yourself, the way you spend your free time sketching in the dirt, the way you prefer the company of books to the company of people, could be used against you. Your individuality, your unique quirks, are not a sign of your character, but a sign of your corruption. In this world, the safest thing to be is a clone, a mirror, a perfect reflection of everyone around you. To be different is to be dangerous, and to be dangerous is to be a witch. You leave the strange old hermit behind and walk a bit deeper into the woods. The air growing cooler and the light dimmer under the dense canopy of trees. The ground is soft with years of fallen leaves and pine needles. You notice a patch of stinging nettles, their jagged leaves a vibrant green, and you instinctively know they can be dried and used to make a tea that helps with joint pain. Farther on, you spot a cluster of foxglove, their beautiful purple bells a warning of their poisonous nature. But you also know that in very small, careful doses, they can be a potent heart medicine. This knowledge, your natural curiosity about the world around you, brings us to the 13th reason you might be called a witch. You know a lot of plants. The line between a wise woman with knowledge of herbs and a witch with a grimoire of sinister potions was incredibly thin. And often, it was a line drawn by a person who was either jealous of your skills or afraid of them. The mainstream historical fact here is that folk medicine was a prevalent, and often effective, way for people to deal with illness and injury. Women, in particular, were the keepers of this knowledge, passed down through generations. They knew which plants could heal a wound, which could soothe a cough, and which could bring on a restful sleep. But this knowledge was seen as a threat to the established medical authorities, who were almost exclusively men. A woman who could cure an illness with a handful of weeds from the forest was a rival to a doctor who charged a fortune for a useless or even harmful remedy. Your knowledge isn't seen as a gift, it's seen as a weapon. A tool you use to wield a power that is not rightfully yours. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a deliberate attempt to suppress female healers or a coincidental result of a broader fear of the unknown. But the effect was the same. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief in sympathetic botany. The idea was that the properties of a plant were not just physical, but spiritual. A plant that looked like a certain body part could be used to heal that body part. A plant with a thorny stem could be used to inflict pain. Your knowledge of these connections isn't seen as a form of natural science. It's seen as a form of magic. A way of bending the natural world to your will. The beautiful, but poisonous, foxglove isn't just a plant with a specific chemical property. It's a tool of death that you, a woman of unholy knowledge, have mastered. You continue your walk, your feet silent on the forest floor, and you feel a deep sadness at the unfairness of it all. You are a natural scientist, a woman who loves the beauty and complexity of the world around her. But your love is being twisted into a perversion, your knowledge into a crime. The simple act of identifying a plant, of knowing its properties, of understanding its place in the world, is an act of rebellion. You are a woman who is not afraid of the woods, a woman who is not afraid of the wildness of nature. And in this fear-filled world, that is a terrifying thing. You are a walking encyclopedia of knowledge, and every page of that encyclopedia is a potential charge against you. You continue your walk through the woods, the air growing thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. You feel a sense of peace here, a feeling you rarely experience in the village, a feeling of being a part of something ancient and wild. You pass a small stream, its water clear and cold, and you know that the clay from its banks, when mixed with certain crushed leaves, can be used to treat a rash or a burn. This practice of using old, time-honored remedies is the 14th reason you might be called a witch. You practice folk medicine. It's a subtle but crucial distinction from simply knowing about plants. Folk medicine is the application of that knowledge, the act of using it to heal others. And in a world where God and the devil were believed to be the only two powers, healing from any other source was a dangerous, and possibly heretical, act. The mainstream historical fact here is that folk healing traditions were often intertwined with superstition and magical thinking. A healer might use a specific herb, but she might also recite a charm or a prayer, or perform a ritual to make the remedy more effective. This blend of the practical and the magical was a deep-seated part of daily life for most people. But it was also a deep-seated part of the accusations against witches. A healer who helped a sick child might be seen as a miracle worker. But if that same child later fell ill again, the healing would be reinterpreted as a curse. The charm would be seen as a spell, the prayer as an incantation, and the ritual as a pact with a demon. The line between a blessing and a curse was a fragile one. And it was often drawn in hindsight, after the fact, when it was already too late for the accused. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were a way for the church to eliminate rival spiritual authorities or a way to discredit a belief system that was not strictly Christian. But it's clear that folk healers were disproportionately targeted. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the belief that a witch could magically transfer an illness from a sick person to an animal. A folk healer might have a specific ritual where she would touch a sick person and then touch a rooster or a pig. And if the animal later became ill and died, it was seen as proof of her power, but a power that was inherently evil. You can see the tragic logic of it all. The healer is trying to save a life, but her very act of doing so is being twisted into a sinister and supernatural crime. You step out of the woods and back onto the path, your mind racing. You've always believed that you were a good person, a person who used her knowledge to help others. But you now realize that in this world, that is not a virtue, it is a vice. Your compassion, your knowledge, your desire to heal are not seen as gifts from God, but as instruments of the devil. You are a woman who is not afraid of the shadows, a woman who is not afraid of the wildness of nature. And in this fear-filled world, that is a terrifying thing. You are a walking symbol of everything that a conservative, superstitious society fears, and your every action, no matter how good, is a potential piece of evidence against you. You've made it back to the edge of the village, and as you walk, you notice a sleek, black cat sitting on a fence post, its tail twitching slowly back and forth. Its eyes, a brilliant emerald green, follow you as you pass. It's a beautiful creature, but its presence here, in this world, is a dangerous thing. This brings us to the 15th and final reason you might be called a witch. You owned a cat. In a society where most animals were seen as simple beasts of burden or sources of food, a cat, especially a black cat, was a figure of deep suspicion. It was a creature of the night, a silent hunter, and its independent, solitary nature was seen as a rejection of human authority. In the minds of the superstitious, a cat was not just a cat, it was a familiar. a demon in animal form, sent by the devil to assist a witch in her dark deeds. The mainstream historical fact here is that the belief in animal familiars was a central component of the witch hunts. A familiar was a demonic spirit that took the form of a small animal, a cat, a dog, a mouse, or even a toad, and served as a witch's assistant. It was a way for the witch to perform her magic, to cast spells, and to communicate with the devil. The familiar was believed to feed on the witch's blood, and the witch's mark, that insensitive spot on the body we discussed earlier, was often believed to be the place where the familiar would suckle. The cat, with its stealthy nature and its nocturnal habits, was the perfect candidate for a familiar. A cat's purr was not a sign of contentment, but the sound of a demonic incantation. Historians still argue whether the belief in familiars was a genuine, pre-Christian folk tradition or a creation of the witch hunters to justify their prosecutions. But the effect was the same. The quirky tidbit that illustrates this is that the color of the cat mattered a great deal. While any cat could be a familiar, a black cat was the most feared. In many cultures, the black cat was already associated with bad luck and evil omens. And the witch hunts simply solidified this association. To own a black cat was to have an open invitation to the devil. A public declaration of your wicked intentions. That sleek, black cat on the fence post isn't just a stray, it's a living, breathing piece of evidence against you. The village isn't seeing a harmless feline, they're seeing a demonic spy. A malevolent force that is watching their every move. You hurry past the cat, trying not to make eye contact, but you can feel its green eyes following you. The village is no longer a place of warmth and community. It's a place of traps and snares, of invisible lines and unwritten rules. Your beauty is a lie. Your intelligence is a crime. Your independence is a sin. Your misfortunes are proof of your guilt. Your knowledge is a weapon. Your body is a map of your corruption. And now, even the smallest, most innocent of creatures, a cat, is a living, breathing symbol of your supposed connection to evil. You have been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. And the verdict is the same every time. You are a witch. The world has turned on you. And there is no escape. The only thing you can do is keep your head down and hope that no one notices you. That no one decides to turn that quiet suspicion into a fiery accusation. The sun is beginning to set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the village. The air, which once felt so thick with suspicion, is now cool and quiet. The sounds of the day have faded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant, gentle hoot of an owl. All the terrible reasons, all the dangers and the fears, are now just whispers on the breeze. A story from another time. Your journey is over, and you are safe, tucked away in the quiet darkness. The world we've explored is far away, lost to the annals of history. A reminder of a time when fear was a far more dangerous weapon than any sword. So, let your mind drift. Let the last of the day's worries float away like smoke. Close your eyes, and let the gentle hum of the fan, or the soft silence of the room, carry you away to a place of warmth and comfort. Sleep now, and in the morning, the sun will rise on a world that is brighter, kinder, and safer.